Picture the deck of a ship longer than a football field. Gold fittings, a helicopter pad, a price tag bigger than a lottery jackpot. Now picture that same ship lying on the bottom of the sea. That is where some of the most expensive vessels ever built ended up. Not in a harbor, in ruin, in court, or underwater. I spent weeks pulling apart the stories of 7 floating fortunes that failed completely, and what I found changed the way I look at money and machines. One of them sank 6 weeks after it was handed to its owner. Another tipped over before it ever touched the open ocean. Stay with me, because the last name on my list is one you will recognize, and the way that boat broke the man who owned it is a warning almost nobody talks about. I want to start with the one that haunted me the most, because it is the one that felt impossible when I first read it. A brand new luxury yacht, freshly delivered, gleaming, insured for tens of millions, sinking in calm water while everyone watched. Her name was Yogi. She was built in Turkey by a respected yard, 60 meters of steel and glass, roughly 200 feet from bow to stern. She was finished and handed over in the autumn of 2011. By February of 2012, she was gone. I traced the timeline through maritime incident reports and the accounts of the Greek Coast Guard, and the sequence still stuns me. She was sailing in the Aegean Sea near the island of Skyros when the weather turned. Not a hurricane, not a monster storm out of a movie. A rough winter blow, the kind those waters see every single year. The crew reported flooding. Then the power failed. Then the pumps that were supposed to push the water back out stopped working. 8 crew members climbed into a life raft and were plucked from the sea by a military helicopter. And this brand new symbol of wealth, barely months old, rolled over and slipped beneath the surface. Here is the part that kept me up. This was not an old rust bucket. This was a machine that cost a fortune, carrying every modern system money could buy. And it drowned in weather that fishing boats survive. When I first read that, I assumed it was a freak accident, a 1-in-a-million event. But the deeper I dug, the more I realized Yogi was not alone, and she was not even the strangest story on my list. Because at least Yogi made it out to sea. The next one never even got that far. Therefore, let me take you to a shipyard in Turkey again, a few years later, to a yacht that carried the boldest name of them all. She was called the One, 90 meters long, nearly 300 feet, a vessel built to be one of the most impressive private ships on the planet. And in the spring of 2021, while she sat at the dock being fitted out, she did something no yacht is ever supposed to do. She leaned. Then she leaned further. Then she rolled onto her side right there in the harbor, half in the water and half exposed, like a beached whale made of steel. I found the photographs and I could not stop staring at them. A ship worth an unthinkable amount of money, lying on her flank before she had ever carried a single guest, before she had ever felt a real wave. The investigation into what happened pointed to problems with stability and the flooding of the hull while she was moored. Think about that for a moment. All that engineering, all those naval architects and designers and specialists, and the boat could not even stay upright standing still at the dock. That is when the pattern started to bother me. 2 enormous yachts, 2 different years, 2 total disasters, and in both cases, the failure was not bad luck out on the wild ocean. It was something wrong on the inside, something that should have been caught, that got hidden underneath all that shine. I kept asking myself the same question. If the machines themselves are this fragile, what does that say about the promises being sold along with them? And that question led me straight into a story that made me laugh out loud, right before it made me angry. Because not every failure is a ship that sinks. Some of them fail in a way that is almost more insulting. This next one you may have seen floating around the internet years ago, treated as gospel truth. It was called History Supreme, and it was marketed as the most expensive yacht ever created, valued at nearly $5 billion. $4.8 billion to be exact. The listings claimed it was wrapped in gold and platinum. They said the base was made from solid gold, that the master bedroom featured a wall built from meteorite rock, that a statue on board was carved from real Tyrannosaurus bone. Newspapers repeated it. Blogs repeated it. For years, people simply accepted that somewhere out there floated a $5 billion golden ship. But here is what I found when I actually chased the source. There is no verified photograph of History Supreme in the water. No shipyard ever proved it built her. No harbor ever logged her. No independent expert ever stepped aboard. The entire legend traces back to marketing claims and a supposed sale to a mysterious Malaysian buyer that could never be confirmed. The more maritime writers and naval experts examined it, the clearer it became. This most expensive yacht in the world most likely never existed as a real, functioning vessel at all. It was a story, a beautifully told, endlessly repeated story that fooled millions of people, including plenty of respectable news outlets. And that is a different kind of failure, isn't it? Not a ship that broke. A dream sold so well that nobody stopped to ask whether the ship was even real. That was the moment my whole investigation shifted. Up to that point, I thought I was just collecting disaster stories. Shipwrecks and accidents, bad engineering and rough seas. But History Supreme showed me something else was going on underneath all of this. There is an entire machine built around selling the fantasy of these boats. The bigger the number, the more people believe. The more gold in the description, the fewer questions anyone asks. And once I saw that, I could not unsee it, because it meant some of these failures were not accidents at all. Some of them were baked in from the very beginning, sold to men whose egos were bigger than any hull ever built, and nothing proved that to me like the fourth yacht on my list, a boat so strange that people argued about whether it was a masterpiece or a monster. Her name is a single letter. A. Just A. She was built for a Russian billionaire, and she came in two versions over the years, a motor yacht and later an enormous sailing yacht, both designed to look like nothing else on the water. The sailing version stretches almost 140 meters, over 450 feet, with masts taller than a 20-story building. She reportedly cost somewhere around $600 million, and when people first saw her, they did not know whether to gasp or to laugh. Critics called her a warship. They called her a spaceship. Some called her downright ugly, a floating monument to the idea that if you have enough money, no one can tell you no. But that is not why she is on my list of failures. She is on my list because in the spring of 2022, she was seized, frozen, chained to a dock in Italy, unable to move, because of international sanctions tied to the war in Ukraine. Think about the picture I am painting. $600 million of steel and sail and engineering, one of the most ambitious private ships ever floated, sitting useless in a port, guarded, going nowhere, costing a fortune just to keep tied up. And she was not the only one. That same year, harbors across Europe filled up with these seized giants, monuments to wealth that had suddenly become anchors around their owners' necks. And here is where I finally understood who benefits when a man convinces himself he needs the biggest, boldest, most impossible boat on earth. It is almost never the man himself. It is everyone standing between him and the water, and they get paid whether the ship ever succeeds or not. Because a yacht like this is not one purchase. It is a bottomless pit. I dug into the running costs, and the numbers made my head spin. The rule of thumb that keeps coming up among people who actually deal with these vessels is that you spend around 10% of the purchase price every single year just to keep the thing running. Crew salaries, fuel that gets measured in hundreds of gallons per hour, dockage fees, insurance, endless maintenance on systems that corrode the moment they touch salt water. On a $600 million boat, that is $60 million a year, vanishing, every year. Whether you sail her or not, whether she is free or chained to a dock in Italy. And the people collecting all that money, the brokers and the yards and the management firms, they have every reason to keep whispering that you need something bigger, grander, more one of a kind. They win when you dream too big. You lose when the dream turns out to be a trap. Now I know exactly what some of you are thinking right now. You are thinking this has nothing to do with you. You will never buy a 200-foot yacht. You will never wrap anything in gold. So why should any of this matter to your life? I thought the same thing halfway through my digging, until I realized the lesson buried in these wrecks is not about boats at all. This next part I put together specifically for the person watching who feels like billionaire disasters have no bearing on their own kitchen table, because the trap that sank these ships is the exact same trap that quietly drains ordinary households, and you can spot it this week with nothing more than a pen and a piece of paper. Here is the pattern I found sitting underneath every single one of these failures. It was never the sticker price that destroyed these people. It was the cost of keeping the thing alive after they bought it. That 10% rule, the 60 million a year, the fuel and the crew and the maintenance that never stops. The purchase was the small part. The ownership was the killer. And that is the exact same math that hurts regular families, just with smaller numbers and the same deadly shape. The car that seemed affordable until the insurance and the repairs and the fuel piled up. The bigger house that looked like a dream until the heating and the taxes and the upkeep hollowed out every paycheck. The subscription you forgot about that has quietly pulled money out of your account for years. Same trap, different size. So here is what I want you to do, and you can do it tonight. Take any big thing you own or want to own, and do not write down what it costs to buy. Write down what it costs to keep, every month for a whole year. Fuel, insurance, repairs, fees, everything. Multiply it out. That yearly number is the truth. That is the number the salesman never leads with, the same way the yacht brokers never lead with the 60 million. The billionaires drowned because they only looked at the price on the tag. You do not have to make the same mistake. And once you see the true cost of keeping a thing, half the temptations in your life suddenly lose their grip. That single habit, looking at the cost to keep instead of the cost to buy, is the most valuable thing I pulled out of all this wreckage. And that right there is the thing I keep coming back to, because it does not only happen at the top end of the dock. The same people who get paid whether the ship succeeds or not are standing next to the ordinary man too, at the used boat listing, at the boatyard counter, hoping he cannot tell a sound hull from a pretty one. Everything I just showed you about looking past the shine and counting the true cost of keeping a thing, I put down in full in 3 books I wrote for the man on a fixed income who wants one honest old boat that outlives him. In them you learn a surveyor's own 10-second test for judging any used hull before you write the check, the 7 places a smiling seller never lets you look, how to name a leak or an ordinary failure and fix it yourself instead of handing it to the yard, how to keep an old diesel alive past 10,000 hours, and how to build a true annual cost ledger so the boat never surprises you. It is the long version of what this video only has room to gesture at. To get it, scan the QR code right there on your screen, link in the description, pinned comment, and the collection is yours. Now, back to what all that money really buys. But knowing the trap is one thing. Seeing what it does to a real human being is another, and that brings me to the 5th story, the one that reads like a tragedy in 3 acts. This yacht was built in the 1980s for a fabulously wealthy arms dealer. She was 280 feet long, one of the most famous private ships in the world at the time. She had a discotheque, a cinema, a hospital, and a helipad. She appeared in a James Bond film. Her original owner spared no expense, and she was, for a moment, the very definition of floating power. And then the man who built her ran into financial and legal trouble, and the dream he had poured a fortune into had to be sold. Here is where it gets remarkable. The boat was eventually bought by a rising American businessman for a price reported to be around $30 million, far less than what it took to create her. He renamed her and paraded her as proof of his success. But that same businessman soon hit deep financial turbulence of his own, and this enormous, glorious, money-devouring ship became a liability he could not carry. He had to sell her, too. This trophy that was supposed to shout victory to the whole world instead became one more thing he was forced to let go of when the tide went out on his empire. 2 different rich men, 1 boat. Both of them ended up handing her off in the middle of financial crisis. She did not sink. She did not capsize, but as an investment, as a symbol, as a promise of endless success, she failed both of the powerful men who thought owning her proved something. And that taught me the cruelest lesson of all. These boats do not just fail on the water, they fail as the very thing they were bought to be. A monument that lasts. Nothing about them lasts. The moment your fortune wobbles, the trophy becomes the anchor. Therefore, I had to ask the next obvious question. If actually building one of these giants leads to sinking, capsizing, seizure, or ruin, what happens to the ones that are so ambitious they never even get built? And that is the 6th story, and honestly it might be my favorite, because it shows the fantasy at its absolute purest. There was a concept for a super yacht so outrageous it was designed to look like an entire miniature city. The plans called for a floating version of a famous seaside principality, complete with a racetrack modeled on a real Grand Prix circuit, a tennis court, multiple swimming pools, waterfalls, a helipad, submarines, and space for dozens of guests to live like royalty. The estimated price was around $1 billion. One single vessel, $1 billion. The renderings were breathtaking. Magazines wrote it up, people fantasized about it. And it was never built. Not one plate of steel. It existed only as drawings and dreams and press coverage. Now, on the surface, you could say a concept that never gets built cannot really fail. But I see it differently, and the more I sat with it, the more it felt like the perfect symbol of this entire investigation. Here was a billion-dollar promise, gorgeous on paper, impossible in reality, generating headlines and attention and the sweet fantasy of impossible luxury, all without a single thing ever being delivered. It is the same trick as the golden ship that probably never existed. The idea sells. The idea makes money and makes noise. The reality, the actual floating object that has to survive real water and real physics and real running costs, that is the part where everything falls apart. So the designers were, in a strange way, the smartest of all. They got all the glory of the dream and none of the disaster of the delivery. The failure was simply passed on to anyone foolish enough to believe the drawings could ever become real. By this point in my digging, I thought I had seen the whole pattern. Ships that sink, ships that tip over, ships that never existed, ships that get seized, ships that ruin the men who buy them, ships that only ever live as drawings. But there was one more category I had not fully faced, and it turned out to be the most sobering of them all, because it is the one happening right now, in real harbors, to real boats worth more than entire towns. I am talking about the fleet of enormous modern super yachts that were caught up in international sanctions and simply frozen in place around the world. Some of these are among the largest and most expensive private vessels ever constructed. One of them is well over 150 meters, roughly 500 feet, and has been valued at figures approaching or exceeding $500 million. Another, seized in Italy, was reportedly worth around $700 million. These are not old boats with problems. These are peak examples of the craft, the biggest and grandest that money could produce. And overnight, with the stroke of a pen, they became stranded, crews reduced or gone, systems that need constant attention left to sit. Because here is something I learned that most people never think about. A giant yacht cannot simply be parked and forgotten like a car in a garage. It needs constant power, constant maintenance, constant human attention just to keep from rotting, molding, corroding, and rusting from the inside out. Leave one of these vessels idle and it begins to eat itself alive. So governments found themselves holding these seized giants and quickly discovered a bitter truth. Keeping a 500-foot super yacht alive while it sits useless can cost tens of millions of dollars a year. Some of them are reportedly costing the public a fortune just to maintain in limbo, boats that no one can sell easily and no one can use, floating monuments to a spending spree that turned into a legal and financial nightmare. That is the ultimate failure. A vessel so expensive, so complicated, so hungry for money and care, that it becomes a burden even to the powerful institutions that took it away. The dream did not just collapse for the owner, it became a problem for everyone who touched it afterward. And that is where all 7 of these stories finally connected for me into a single thread, and it led me to the one document, the one buried piece of wisdom, that I think is the real treasure at the bottom of this whole shipwreck of a subject. Because after weeks of reading about sinkings and seizures and billion-dollar fantasies, I went looking for the oldest, most honest warning I could find about big boats and big money, something written before all the marketing and the hype existed. And I found it in a phrase that sailors and boat owners have repeated for well over 100 years, showing up in print in old newspapers and nautical columns going back to the early 1900s. The saying goes that the 2 happiest days in a boat owner's life are the day he buys the boat and the day he sells it. People treat it as a little joke. But when I lined it up against these 7 disasters, I realized it is not a joke at all. It is the most compressed piece of financial truth I have ever come across, and it was hiding in plain sight the entire time. Here is what that old saying actually knows, the wisdom that got buried under all the gold leaf and the glossy magazine renderings. It knows that the joy of ownership is at the beginning and at the end, at the moment of the dream and the moment of release, and that everything in the long middle, the actual owning, the keeping, the maintaining, is where the pain lives. Every single yacht on my list proved it. Yogi's owner was thrilled the day she was delivered and had her ripped away 6 weeks later. The businessman with the 280-foot trophy was proud the day he bought her and relieved the day he unloaded her. The sea's giants gave their owners a rush at purchase and a catastrophe in the middle. The old sailors figured this out generations ago, long before there were brokers and marketing departments to drown out the truth. And the beautiful part, the part I want you to carry with you, is that this ancient warning is not really about boats. It is about anything expensive that demands to be fed. The thrill is always at the edges. The cost is always in the middle. And the people selling you the dream will only ever show you the edges. So here is how I want you to use this weekend, because I promised you something you could actually apply, and this is it. Take that old sailor's test and hold it up against the biggest wants in your own life. Before you buy the thing you have been dreaming about, ask yourself honestly, will the happiest day be the day I buy it, and the second happiest day be the day I finally get rid of it? Because if the answer is yes, then what you are really looking at is not an asset. It is a hole in the water that you pour money into, no matter how big or small your version of that boat happens to be. That single question, handed down from people who watched fortunes sink for over a century, will protect your wallet better than any advice a salesman will ever give you for free. It costs 7 billionaires everything to teach it. It costs you nothing to remember it. I went into this looking for stories about sunken luxury, and I came out holding something that felt like it had been taken from all of us and quietly replaced with the opposite message. The message that bigger is always better, and that the price on the tag is the price you pay. It isn't. It never was. And somewhere out there, an old boat owner or an old sailor tried to warn every generation that came after him, in a single sentence, before the noise buried it. You are the kind of person who would rather hold a hard, true fact than a shiny, comforting lie, or you would have clicked away 20 minutes ago. So let me ask you directly, and I really do want your answer. Out of all 7, which one hit you the hardest? Was it the brand new yacht that sank in 6 weeks, the golden ship that probably never existed, or the trophy that ruined 2 rich men in a row? Tell me in the comments below, and tell me what part of the world you are watching from, because I read these and I genuinely want to know who is out there following this trail with me. If you believe, like I do, that recovering the old, honest knowledge is worth more than any expensive fantasy being sold to us today, then come along, because the next thing I am investigating is a forgotten household method that people swore by 100 years ago to slash their heating bills through an entire winter, and what I found in the old records nearly knocked me off my chair. Before you go, let me tell you where this really leads. This video gave you the overview, but inside my membership I share the rest. Everything I couldn't fit here. And if a story leaves you wondering, you can ask me directly, and a real person answers, never a machine. You'd belong among the Old Ways folks with me in the Old Ways Almanac. Just point your phone's camera at the code on screen. Cancel anytime with one click. Now, if these yachts surprised you, wait until you see the catamarans. I'll show you 7 of them that cost over $1 million each, yet failed completely. It's starting right here.